The wedding dress lay crumpled in Montana dust as Emma Carraway stood abandoned at the ranch gate, her mail-order husband's cowardly note trembling in her hand. Changed my mind. Don't come looking. The stagecoach had already disappeared, leaving her stranded under the merciless August sun with nowhere to go. That's when Caleb Rowan rode up, the neighboring rancher who'd witnessed her humiliation and did something that would change both their lives forever. Friends, settle in as I share this remarkable true story, and don't forget to comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly on Emma Carraway as she stood at the weathered gate of the Henderson Ranch, her traveling trunk beside her and a crumpled piece of paper clutched in her gloved hand. The stagecoach that had brought her here was already a distant memory, its dust clouds settling on the horizon like her rapidly fading hopes. She read the note again, though she'd already memorized its cruel brevity. Miss Carraway, changed my mind. The arrangement is off. Don't come looking. T. Henderson. 3 months of letters. 3 months of promises. 3 months of building dreams around a man she'd never met but had chosen to trust with her entire future. And now this. Abandonment before she'd even set foot on what was supposed to be her new home. Emma's legs trembled beneath her heavy traveling dress, but she refused to sit on her trunk like some discarded piece of baggage. She was 26 years old, had left everything behind in Philadelphia after her father's death left her penniless, and had spent her last dollar on the journey west. The advertisement had seemed like salvation. Respectable rancher seeks capable wife. Must be strong, willing to work, good with household management, comfortable life assured. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her stiffen. Perhaps Henderson had reconsidered, she thought wildly, smoothing her dark hair beneath her bonnet. But the rider who appeared wasn't the portly, middle-aged man from the photograph Henderson had sent. This man sat tall in his saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sky. His horse, a magnificent black stallion, snorted and pawed the ground as he reined in beside her. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his worn Stetson. His voice was deep, gravelly, like he didn't use it much. "You lost?" Emma lifted her chin, her pride the only thing keeping her upright. "No, sir. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. It's Mr. Henderson who seems to have lost his way." The man's eyes flicked to the note still visible in her hand, then to the trunk with its Philadelphia railway tags. Understanding dawned on his weathered face. "You're the bride from back east." It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I was supposed to be. It seems Mr. Henderson has had a change of heart. That yellow-bellied snake," the man muttered, then caught himself. "Pardon my language, ma'am. Tom Henderson's been my neighbor for 5 years, but this—" He shook his head in disgust. "This ain't right." Emma felt tears threatening, but blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this stranger. She would not cry at all. "If you could perhaps direct me to town, sir? I need to find lodging and employment." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, and Emma noticed he moved with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. Up close, she could see his eyes weren't just blue. They held flecks of gray like storm clouds gathering. "Town's 15 miles east, ma'am, and if you'll pardon my saying, there ain't much there for a lady on her own. The only lodging is above the saloon, and the only employment—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Emma understood what he wasn't saying. A woman alone in a frontier town had limited options, none of them respectable. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I'll simply have to make do." "With what money?" he asked bluntly. "Henderson wire you funds for the return journey?" Her silence was answer enough. The man, she still didn't know his name, took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, peppered with premature silver, though he couldn't be more than 35. "This is Caleb Rowan," he said finally. "My spread's just over that ridge. Nothing fancy, but it's honest. I could use help with the house and such. Room, board, and wages, proper wages," he added firmly, meeting her eyes. "Nothing untoward. I give you my word on that." Emma studied him carefully. His clothes were clean but mended, his boots worn but well maintained. His hands were calloused from work, his face honest if not handsome in the conventional sense. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness that recognized her own. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you help me?" Caleb replaced his hat, considering his answer. "Because a man who'd abandon a woman like this ain't worth spit," he said. "Because you came all this way on a promise, and somebody ought to keep at least part of it. And because—" He paused, looking past her toward the Henderson ranch. "Because I know what it's like to be alone when you counted on not being." The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing across the road. Emma's dress whipped around her ankles, and she had to hold her bonnet to keep it from flying away. She thought of her options: the saloon in town, the dangerous journey back east with no money, or this stranger's unexpected offer. "I don't even know you," she said. "No, ma'am, you don't." "But you didn't know Henderson either, did you?" "He had a point. I'll make you a deal. Come to my place, get settled for the night. Tomorrow, if you want, I'll take you to town myself, pay for your lodging for a week while you figure things out. But at least tonight, you'll have a decent meal and a clean bed." Emma looked at the Henderson ranch, dark and unwelcoming despite the sunny day. Then she looked at Caleb Rowan, waiting patiently for her answer. "I accept your offer, Mr. Rowan. For tonight." He nodded and moved to pick up her trunk, lifting it easily despite its weight. "Let me tie this to my horse." "Can you ride?" "I've ridden," Emma said, though it had been years since she'd been on anything but a carriage horse in Philadelphia. "Good." He secured the trunk with practiced efficiency, then turned back to her. "You can ride with me or walk alongside. Your choice." The thought of walking 15 miles in her traveling dress and thin boots was unbearable. But the impropriety of riding with a stranger— then again, what did propriety matter now? She'd already thrown it away by answering a matrimonial advertisement. "I'll ride," she said. Caleb mounted first, then reached down to help her up. His hand was strong, steady, and he settled her side saddle in front of him with careful propriety, making sure her skirts were arranged properly. "Hold on to the saddle horn, ma'am." Zeus. "Here's gentle, but the trail gets rough." As they rode away from the Henderson ranch, Emma couldn't help but look back once. The gate stood open like a mouth, mocking her foolishness. But then Caleb said quietly, "Don't look back, Miss Carroway. Nothing good ever comes from looking back." The ride to Caleb's ranch took an hour through terrain that shifted from flat grassland to rolling hills dotted with pine and cottonwood. He pointed out landmarks as they went: Miller's Creek, where the water ran clear and cold even in summer; Eagle's Rest, a massive rock formation that looked like a bird in flight. The boundary between his land and Henderson's, marked by a fence he'd built himself. "How much land do you have?" Emma asked, partly from curiosity and partly to fill the silence that felt too intimate. 640 acres, Caleb replied. "Not as much as Henderson's 2,000, but it's mine free and clear. No debts, no liens. Built the house and barn myself, first year I was here." "Where were you before?" "Virginia, originally. Then the war came." His voice tightened almost imperceptibly. "After that, seemed like going west was the only direction that made sense." Emma understood not wanting to talk about the war. She'd been just a girl when it ended, but she remembered the men who came back changed, hollow-eyed and haunted. Her own father had been too old to fight, but he'd lost his business supplying the Union Army when government contracts dried up after Appomattox. "What about you?" Caleb asked. "What brings a Philadelphia lady to answer an advertisement for a frontier bride?" "Desperation," Emma said honestly. "My father died 6 months ago. Debts took everything: the house, the business, even the furniture. I worked in a factory for 3 months, 12 hours a day for barely enough to eat. When I saw Mr. Henderson's advertisement," she shrugged. "It seemed like a chance at something better." "Factory work," Caleb said thoughtfully. "That why your hands are like they are?" Emma looked at her hands in surprise. She'd worn gloves, but he'd noticed anyway: the calluses, the small scars from needle pricks and machine accidents. "You're observant. Have to be living out here. Notice things or they might kill you." He paused. "Those hands say you're not afraid of work." "That's good. This life ain't easy." They crested a hill, and Caleb's ranch spread out before them. It was smaller than she'd expected, but neat as a pin. The house was single-story, built of logs with a proper shingle roof and a covered porch running the full length of the front. The barn was newer, painted red, with a corral attached where several horses grazed. A kitchen garden struggled against the summer heat, and she could see a well with a pump, a chicken coop, and what looked like a root cellar. "It's nice," Emma said, meaning it. "You built all this yourself?" "Mostly. Had help with the barn raising. Neighbors pitched in. That's how it works out here. We help each other when needed." His voice hardened slightly. "Most of us, anyway." He helped her down from the horse, his hands at her waist for just a moment before stepping back quickly. "I'll show you the house." Inside was sparse but clean. The main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a large stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. A rocking chair sat by the window, the only piece that looked store-bought rather than handmade. "There's 2 bedrooms," Caleb said, gesturing down a short hallway. "You can have the larger one. I'll move my things to the smaller." "I couldn't." "You could, and you will," he said firmly. "If you're staying, even for one night, you'll be comfortable. I'll get your trunk." While he was outside, Emma explored the rest of the house. The larger bedroom had a proper bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser with a mirror, and another rocking chair. The smaller room held a narrow cot and not much else. She wondered if he'd built the larger room with a wife in mind, then decided not to ask. The kitchen area was well stocked but showed a bachelor's limitations. Bags of flour and beans, preserved meat, canned goods, but no sign of anything fresh except eggs. The garden she'd seen outside made more sense now. He'd tried to grow vegetables but didn't know how to tend them properly. "I usually just fry up some bacon and beans," Caleb said from the doorway, making her jump. He'd set her trunk in the bedroom and was watching her examine his supplies. "There's eggs, too. Chickens are good layers." "I can cook," Emma offered. "If you'd like, I mean. As a thank you for your kindness." "I'd appreciate that," he admitted. "Been living on my own cooking for 3 years now. A man gets tired of his own limitations." Emma found an apron hanging on a hook and tied it around her waist. It felt strange, domestic, like playing house with a stranger. But as she started working, checking supplies, planning a meal from what was available, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. She made biscuits from memory, her mother's recipe that didn't need measurements. While they baked, she fried bacon, then used the grease to cook potatoes and onions she found in the root cellar. The eggs she scrambled with a bit of cream from the cold box, adding salt and pepper and a hint of paprika she discovered in the back of a shelf. Caleb watched from the doorway as she worked, not offering to help but not getting in the way either. When she finally set the table, properly, with forks on the left and knives on the right, even though his silverware was mismatched, his expression was unreadable. "This is too much trouble," he said. "Nonsense. Sit down before it gets cold." They ate in silence at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emma was hungrier than she'd realized, and the food, simple as it was, tasted better than anything she'd had in months. Caleb ate steadily, methodically, like a man who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. "This is good," he said finally. "Real good. Haven't had biscuits like these since—" He trailed off. "Since?" "Since my mother died. That was before the war." Emma wanted to ask more but sensed the boundary. Instead, she said, "The garden needs water, and mulch around the plants to keep the moisture in. Your tomatoes are trying to grow, but they need support stakes." "You know about gardening?" "My mother kept a garden. I helped her from the time I could walk." The memory was bittersweet. "She died when I was 16. Consumption." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." Emma rose to clear the dishes, but Caleb stopped her. "You cooked." "I'll clean. That's only fair." She watched, bemused, as this rough rancher carefully washed each dish and dried it with a clean cloth. Tom Henderson's letters had made much of his wealth and status, but he'd never mentioned anything about sharing household work. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma found herself on the porch in the rocking chair while Caleb tended to the horses. She could hear him talking to them in a low, soothing voice, and something about it made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. He joined her as the darkness fell, taking a seat on the porch steps rather than the other chair. You decided what you want to do tomorrow? Emma had been thinking about little else. Your offer, room and board and wages for household help, was that genuine? Every word. For how long? Long as you want, or until you find something better. And you expect nothing else? No additional duties? Caleb turned to look at her directly. Miss Carraway, I'm not Tom Henderson. I don't make promises I won't keep, and I don't take what isn't freely given. You'd be my housekeeper, nothing more, unless you decide otherwise. And if you decide otherwise, it won't be because you feel obligated or trapped. That clear enough? Yes, Emma said softly. Very clear. Good. Then what's your decision? Emma looked out at the darkening land, vast and foreign and frightening, but also beautiful in its wildness, its honesty. In Philadelphia, she'd been surrounded by people and never felt more alone. Here, with this taciturn stranger, she felt safe wasn't quite the right word. Seen, maybe. Recognized as someone with value beyond her circumstances. I'll stay, she said. For now. We'll see how it goes. Caleb nodded and stood. Fair enough. I'll be up at dawn to tend the animals. You can sleep as late as you need. You've had a long journey. I'm used to early rising. Then I'll see you at breakfast. He paused at the door. Miss Carraway? I'm sorry about Henderson. Man's a fool. After he went inside, Emma sat on the porch a while longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier night. Coyotes in the distance, wind through the grass, the creak of the windmill. 24 hours ago, she'd been on a train, full of hope and dreams of the life she'd build with a stranger. Now she was here with a different stranger, all her dreams in ashes. But maybe, she thought, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky, maybe dreams that came too easily weren't worth having. Maybe the things worth having were the ones you had to build yourself, piece by piece, day by day. Inside the house, she could hear Caleb moving around, the quiet sounds of a man preparing for bed. Tomorrow, she would learn his routines, adapt to his ways, carve out a space for herself in this unexpected life. It wasn't what she'd planned, but plans, she was learning, were just stories you told yourself about a future you couldn't really control. She thought about Tom Henderson, wondered what had made him change his mind. Had he seen her from a distance and found her wanting? Had another woman caught his eye? Or had he simply been a coward all along, playing at wanting a wife until the reality of it arrived at his gate? It didn't matter, she decided. Henderson had done her a favor, though he'd never know it. Because whatever happened next, whatever this arrangement with Caleb Rowan became, at least it would be honest. No false promises, no elaborate letters painting pictures of a life that didn't exist. Just work and rest, meals shared in comfortable silence, and the slow rhythm of days spent building something real. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn, her body still on Philadelphia time. She dressed quietly in her simplest dress. She'd need to make more practical clothes soon, and made her way to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, coffee brewing on the stove. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Not used to the quiet, she admitted. In the city, there's always noise, carriages, people, factories running through the night. You'll get used to it, or it'll drive you mad. One or the other. His dry humor surprised her into a small laugh. I'm heading out to check the fence lines today. Storm last week might have brought some down. I thought I'd work on the garden if that's acceptable. And there's mending to be done. I noticed some shirts that need attention. You don't have to, Mr. Rowan, Emma interrupted. If I'm to earn my keep, I need to actually earn it. I'm not a decoration or a charity case. I'm hired help, remember? He studied her for a moment, then nodded. There's a sewing box in the hall closet. Was my mother's, but the needles and thread should still be good. After breakfast, which Emma insisted on cooking despite his protests, Caleb saddled his horse and prepared to leave. He showed her where he kept the rifle. Just in case, he said, though you shouldn't need it. The root cellar, the spring house where perishables stayed cool. I'll be back by sunset, he said. There's books on the shelf if you get bored. Emma watched him ride away, then surveyed her temporary domain. The house needed work, curtains for the windows, rugs for the floors, a woman's touch that had been absent too long. But first, the garden. She found tools in the barn and set to work. The sun climbed higher, hotter than she was used to, but she persisted. She staked the tomatoes, weeded around the beans, dug irrigation channels from the well. By noon, her dress was soaked with sweat, and her hands were blistered despite the calluses. But the garden looked like something that might actually produce food. Inside, she investigated more thoroughly. The sewing box was indeed well stocked, and the shirts needing mending were in a pile that suggested Caleb had been putting off the task for months. She set up a workstation by the window where the light was best and began. As she worked, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done since before her father's death. The simple domesticity of it all, the quiet purpose, soothed something in her that had been raw for too long. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the horses approaching until they were almost at the house. Looking out, she saw Caleb had returned, with company. 3 men, all rough-looking, dismounted and tied their horses to the porch rail. Emma quickly smoothed her hair and removed her apron. She didn't know the protocol here. Should she greet them? Hide? Caleb hadn't mentioned expecting visitors. The door opened and Caleb entered, his expression tight. "Miss Carraway, we have guests. This is Jim Miller, Bob Watson, and Tom Henderson." Emma's stomach dropped. Henderson was nothing like his photograph. Heavier, older, with mean little eyes that raked over her dismissively. "So this is where you ended up," Henderson said. "Should have figured Rowan would snatch up my leavings." "Watch your tongue, Tom," Caleb warned quietly. "Just stating facts," Henderson said, helping himself to a seat without invitation. "Heard in town you'd taken in a stray. Thought I'd come see for myself." Emma felt her spine stiffen. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "would you care for coffee?" "Well, ain't she domesticated already?" Henderson laughed unpleasantly. "See, boys?" This is why I changed my mind. Could tell from her letters she was too high and mighty for the likes of us. All that fancy education and talk about literature and music. What use is that on a ranch? "More use than a man who breaks his word," Emma said before she could stop herself. The room went silent. Henderson's face reddened. "You got something to say to me, woman?" "Nothing that would improve you, sir." Miller and Watson exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. Caleb moved slightly, positioning himself between Emma and Henderson. "You came to see she was safe and situated," Caleb said. "You've seen it. Now get off my land." "Your land?" Henderson stood, sneering. "For now, maybe. But that creek that feeds your well runs through my property first. Be a shame if something happened to it." "You threatening me, Tom." "Just being neighborly. Wouldn't want your housekeeper to suffer from lack of water." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Emma saw Caleb's hands clench, but he kept his voice level. "Get out." Henderson laughed and headed for the door. "See you around, Rowan." "Miss Carraway." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy playing house while it lasts." After they left, Caleb stood rigid, staring at the door. Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the effort it took not to go after them. "He can't really divert the creek, can he?" she asked. "Legally?" "Number. Water rights were established when we claimed our lands, but legal and what happens out here aren't always the same thing." He turned to her. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought you into this." "You didn't." "I brought myself." Emma returned to her sewing, though her hands shook slightly. "Mr. Henderson seems like the type who's made many enemies. Eventually, that catches up with a man." Caleb watched her for a moment, something like admiration in his eyes. "You handled him well. Most women would have been frightened." "I've dealt with worse than Tom Henderson," Emma said. "Factory foremen who think any woman without protection is fair game, landlords who offer to forgive rent for certain favors. At least Henderson is obvious about his nature. Still, you shouldn't have to deal with him. Life is full of things we shouldn't have to deal with, Mr. Rowan. The measure of a person is how they handle them anyway." That evening, as they ate dinner, venison stew Emma had found the makings for, Caleb was quieter than usual. Finally he said, "Henderson will make trouble. He's that type. If you want to reconsider staying." "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, then seemed surprised by his own vehemence. "No, It's been nice having someone here, coming home to a cooked meal and conversation. But I won't have you staying out of stubbornness if it puts you in danger." Emma considered this. Mr. Rowan, Caleb, may I speak plainly? He nodded. I have nowhere else to go. No money, no family, no prospects back east. You've offered me honest work for honest pay and a safe place to stay. That's more than anyone else has offered me in 6 months. Tom Henderson is unpleasant, but he's also a coward. He proved that by abandoning me at his gate. Cowards make threats, but they rarely follow through unless they're certain of winning. You've got him figured pretty well for one meeting. I've met his type before. They're all the same, whether they wear overalls or suits. She paused. Besides, your garden needs tending, your shirts need mending, and you need to learn that there are more ways to cook beans than just frying them with bacon. That surprised a laugh out of him, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Fair enough, Miss Carroway. We'll take it day by day. Emma, she said, if we're going to be sharing a house, you should call me Emma. Emma, he repeated, as if testing the name. Then you'd better call me Caleb. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Emma with its comfort. She rose each morning before dawn, making coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, the way Caleb liked it, and had breakfast ready by the time he came in from his early chores. They ate together in companionable silence, planning the day's work, then went their separate ways until evening brought them back together again. The garden began to thrive under her care. The tomatoes grew heavy on their stakes, the beans climbed their poles with eager green tendrils, and she even coaxed the struggling squash plants back to life. Caleb watched her work sometimes, leaning against the fence post with an expression she couldn't quite read. You've got a gift, he said one evening as she picked beans for dinner. Everything you touch seems to grow. Plants are simple, Emma replied, placing the beans in her basket. They just need attention, water, and someone to notice when they're struggling. People aren't so different, really. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, I tried to grow roses once. My mother loved roses, brought cuttings all the way from Virginia, planted them along the front of the house. He gestured to a bare patch of earth near the porch. They died the first winter. I didn't know they needed protection from the cold. We could try again, Emma suggested carefully. Wild roses would do better here. They're hardy, meant for this climate. Maybe, he said, but she heard the hope in it. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Emma took the wagon to town for supplies. Caleb had resisted at first, wanting to accompany her, but she'd insisted she could manage. I'm not a child, Caleb. I can handle a wagon and horses, and I can certainly handle buying flour and fabric. He'd relented, though she noticed he'd cleaned and loaded the rifle, placing it under the wagon seat, just in case. The town of Miller's Creek was exactly what she'd expected. One main street lined with essential businesses, general store, blacksmith, saloon, hotel, and a small church that doubled as the schoolhouse. What she hadn't expected was the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store. You'd be the woman staying out at the Rowan place, the shopkeeper's wife said, her tone carefully neutral. I'm Mr. Rowan's housekeeper, yes, Emma replied evenly. Emma Carroway. Housekeeper, someone muttered from the back of the store, the word laden with implication. Emma kept her expression pleasant as she handed over her list. I'll also need to look at your fabric selection, Mrs. Dobson. Mary Dobson. The woman's expression softened slightly. Heard you came out to marry Tom Henderson. Plans change, Emma said simply. That they do. Mary began gathering the items on Emma's list. Caleb Rowan's a good man, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but honest. Helped my husband rebuild our barn after a storm 2 years back. Wouldn't take a penny for it. He seems very kind, Emma agreed, examining a bolt of sturdy blue cotton that would make good work dresses. Kind enough to take in a stranger, apparently, said another voice. Emma turned to find a younger woman, prettily dressed in green calico, eyeing her with obvious disapproval. I'm Sarah Watson. My father owns the Double Bar Ranch. Miss Watson, Emma acknowledged with a nod. We've all been wondering what sort of woman answers those advertisements. Mail-order bride. Sarah said it like it tasted sour. Desperate, I suppose. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. Desperate for honest work and a new start, yes. I don't see any shame in that.
Work, Sarah laughed unpleasantly. Is that what they're calling it now? Sarah Watson, Mary Dobson snapped. You mind your tongue in my store. But the damage was done. Emma could feel the eyes on her, the whispers that would follow her out. She completed her purchases with as much dignity as she could muster, but her hands trembled as she loaded the wagon. Miss Carroway? She turned to find a man she didn't recognize, older, with kind eyes and a clerical collar. I'm Reverend Mills, he said. I wanted to introduce myself and invite you to Sunday services. That's kind of you, Reverend, but I'm not sure. Everyone is welcome in God's house, he said firmly, loud enough for passers-by to hear. And I mean everyone. We're a small community, Miss Carroway. Sometimes that makes people small-minded. But there are good folks here, too. Give them time. Emma thanked him and drove home, but the encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. When she pulled up to the ranch, Caleb was waiting on the porch, clearly having watched for her return. How was town? He asked, helping her down from the wagon. Educational, she said dryly. His jaw tightened. Who gave you trouble? It doesn't matter. People will think what they want to think. Emma, no, Caleb. She turned to face him fully. If I'm going to live here, I need to fight my own battles. I can't have you riding to my rescue every time someone says something unpleasant. That would only confirm what they already suspect. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. You're right. But if anyone crosses a line, then I'll tell you, she promised. Now help me unload this wagon. I bought fabric to make proper curtains, and you're going to help me hang them whether you like it or not. That earned her one of his rare smiles. As they worked together, unloading supplies and discussing where curtains were most needed, Emma felt the knot in her chest loosening. Let the town think what it wanted. Here, in this simple house with this complicated man, she was building something real. That night, a summer storm rolled in with sudden violence. Emma woke to thunder that shook the walls and lightning that turned night into brief, brilliant day. She lay in bed, listening to the rain pound the roof, until she heard something else, the sound of horses, agitated and afraid. She pulled on her wrapper and hurried to the main room, finding Caleb already dressed and pulling on his boots. The horses are spooked, he said. This storm's worse than expected. I need to get them into the barn. I'll help. No, it's too dangerous. But Emma was already reaching for her shawl. We can argue about it, or we can save your horses. Which would you prefer? Together they ran into the storm. The rain hit like cold needles, soaking them instantly. The horses were indeed panicked, racing around the corral, eyes rolling white with fear. One, a young mare Caleb had been training, had already injured herself against the fence. We need to calm them, Caleb shouted over the storm. If they keep running like this, they'll hurt themselves worse. Emma had grown up with carriage horses, not ranch stock, but fear was fear in any animal. She began to sing, an old lullaby her mother had used to calm her during storms. Her voice was nearly lost in the wind, but she kept singing, moving slowly toward the horses with her hands extended. Miraculously, the mare's ears pricked toward her. Emma kept singing, kept moving, until she could catch the horse's halter. Caleb watched for a moment, surprised, then began copying her approach with the other horses. It took an hour to get all the horses safely in the barn. By the time they finished, Emma was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Caleb wrapped a horse blanket around her shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment. That was brave, he said. Foolish, but brave. Like taking in a stranger? She countered. Maybe. In the lamplight of the barn, his eyes were very blue. Emma, Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder immediate and deafening. They both jumped, and the moment, whatever it had been, passed. We should get inside, Caleb said. You need dry clothes before you catch pneumonia. Back in the house, Emma changed into dry things and stoked the fire while Caleb did the same. When he emerged from his room, his hair was still damp, curling slightly at his collar. He looked younger, less guarded. Tea? Emma offered. I bought some in town. Tea, he repeated with amusement. Next you'll have me eating off china plates. Would that be so terrible?
He accepted the cup she offered, wrapping his large hands around it. They sat by the fire, listening to the storm gradually move past. "Why did you really come west?" Caleb asked suddenly. "I know about your father's debts, the factory work, but there had to be other options. Marriage to someone in Philadelphia, domestic service." Emma considered her answer. "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like every choice was already made for you, and all you could do was follow the path?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Every day during the war, every day after, for a long time. That's how I felt in Philadelphia. After Mother died, I kept house for Father, helped with his business correspondence, hosted his dinners. After he died." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Everyone expected me to marry Harold Westbrook. He was Father's partner's son, had been calling on me for 2 years. He was suitable. But when I looked at him, I saw my whole future laid out like a map. Marriage, children, Sunday dinners with his mother, tea with the proper ladies, and slowly disappearing until I wasn't Emma anymore, just Mrs. Harold Westbrook." She took a sip of tea. "The factory was horrible, but at least it was my choice. And when I saw that advertisement, you saw escape. I saw possibility," she corrected. "Even if it had worked out with Henderson, it would have been my choice, my risk. That seemed worth everything." Caleb set down his cup and leaned back in his chair. "I came west to escape too, not a person, but memories. Things I did in the war, things that were done to me. I thought if I got far enough away, worked hard enough, I could forget." "Did it work?" "No. The memories came with me, but the work helped. Building something with my own hands, seeing it grow, that helped." He looked at her. "Having you here helps too. I didn't realize how much silence I was living in until you filled it." Emma felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Caleb, I know this isn't what you planned," he continued. "I know you're making the best of a bad situation, but I want you to know I'm grateful. For the cooking and the curtains and the garden, yes, but more for making this feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep." Before Emma could respond, there was a pounding at the door. Caleb was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle. "Rowan! Open up! It's Jim Miller!" Caleb opened the door to reveal Miller, soaked and muddy. "Tom Henderson's dam burst," he said without preamble. "The water's heading straight for the Baxter place. They've got 3 little ones. We need every hand we can get." Caleb was already reaching for his coat. "Emma, stay here." "Those children," Miller interrupted. "Mrs. Baxter's trying to get them to high ground alone." "Her husband's in town." Emma stood. "I'm coming." "Emma, no." "Don't argue with me, Caleb Rowan. Children need saving." The ride through the storm was nightmarish. The rain had turned roads to rivers of mud, and they could hear the roar of the floodwater ahead. When they reached the Baxter homestead, they found chaos. The water had already reached the house, and Mrs. Baxter was on the roof with her children, screaming for help. "We need rope!" Caleb shouted. Other neighbors were arriving, the Dobsons from town, the Watson men, even some Emma didn't recognize. In crisis, the community came together. They formed a human chain, Caleb wading into the current with a rope tied around his waist. Emma watched, her heart in her throat, as he fought his way to the house. One by one, the children were passed along the chain to safety. Mrs. Baxter came last, sobbing with relief and terror. "My house," she kept saying, "everything we own." "You're alive," Emma told her firmly, wrapping her in a blanket someone had brought. "That's what matters. The rest can be rebuilt." They worked through the night, saving what they could, building barriers to redirect the water. Emma found herself working beside Sarah Watson, both of them filling sandbags in silent cooperation. When Sarah slipped in the mud, Emma caught her arm, pulling her up. "Thank you," Sarah said stiffly. "We help each other out here," Emma replied. "That's what neighbors do." Sarah looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and went back to work. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. The Baxter house was damaged but standing, and no one had been seriously hurt. As people began to disperse, exhausted and muddy, Tom Henderson appeared on his horse, surveying the damage his failed dam had caused. "Shame about all this," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Act of God, though. Storm was worse than anyone expected." "Your dam was built wrong," Caleb said flatly. "Everyone told you it wouldn't hold if we got real rain." "You accusing me of something, Rowan?" Before Caleb could respond, Mr. Baxter arrived, having ridden hard from town. He took one look at his damaged home, his traumatized family, and launched himself at Henderson, pulling him from his horse. It took 3 men to separate them. Henderson retreated, his nose bloody, shouting about pressing charges. But Sheriff Dixon, who'd arrived with Baxter, just shook his head. "Seems to me a man has a right to be upset when negligence nearly kills his family," the sheriff said mildly. "I'd ride on home if I were you, Henderson. And I'd think real hard about fixing that dam properly this time." As Henderson rode away, Emma noticed how the other ranchers looked at him with disgust and dismissal. His position in the community, whatever it had been, was crumbling. "You did good tonight," Mary Dobson said to Emma as they prepared to leave. "Real good. Maybe I misjudged you." "We all make judgments," Emma replied. "The test is whether we can change them when proven wrong." The ride home was quiet, both Emma and Caleb too exhausted for conversation. But when they reached the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon and held her hands for a moment. "You were incredible tonight," he said. "The way you took charge with Mrs. Baxter, how you worked alongside everyone. You belong here, Emma. This land, these people, you belong." "Do I?" she asked, searching his face. "Yes." His voice was rough with exhaustion and something else. "More than I ever expected. More than I probably deserve." He released her hands and stepped back, the moment passing like smoke. But Emma carried the warmth of it with her as she went inside to change out of her muddy clothes. Over the following days, the community's attitude toward Emma shifted perceptibly. People nodded to her in town, stopped to ask after the garden, invited her to quilting circles and church socials. Sarah Watson even apologized, awkwardly but sincerely. "I was jealous," she admitted. "I've been trying to catch Caleb's eye for 2 years, and then you show up and he can't look at anything else." Emma felt her cheeks burn. "We're not. It's just a business arrangement," Sarah laughed. "You keep telling yourself that. But anyone with eyes can see how he watches you, and how you watch him right back." Was it true? Emma found herself studying Caleb when she thought he wasn't looking, the way he gentled the horses, his patience with the neighbor children who sometimes came to see the new foals, the quiet contentment on his face when he sat on the porch in the evening, listening to her talk about her day. And sometimes she caught him watching her, when she was kneading bread or working in the garden or mending by lamplight. His expression in those moments was soft, wondering, like he was seeing something he'd thought lost forever. The summer heat gave way to autumn's cool, and with it came harvest time. Emma's garden produced abundantly, tomatoes for canning, beans for drying, squash for storing. She taught Caleb how to preserve food properly, and their root cellar filled with provisions for winter. "We make a good team," he said one evening as they worked together, cutting apples for drying. They'd bought a bushel from the millers, whose orchard was the pride of the valley. "We do," Emma agreed. She paused in her cutting. "Caleb, what happens when winter comes?" "What do you mean?" "This arrangement, my position here, is it permanent?" He set down his knife and looked at her directly. "Do you want it to be?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to address. Emma thought about the life she'd built here, the friendships forming in town, the satisfaction of hard work, the quiet evenings with this man who'd become so dear to her. "I don't have anywhere else I want to be," she said finally. "Then stay," he said simply, "as long as you want. Forever, if that suits you. Forever." The word should have frightened her, but instead it settled in her chest like coming home. That night, as she prepared for bed, Emma heard Caleb working in the barn. Through her window, she could see the lantern light, could hear him talking to the horses in that low, soothing voice. She thought about Sarah's words, about the way he looked at her, about the way her heart sped up when he smiled. She'd come west for a business arrangement, a practical solution to desperate circumstances. But somewhere between that first sunrise and now, something had shifted. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was choosing, building, becoming. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Emma? You awake? Yes, come in. Caleb stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I've been thinking about what you said, about things being permanent, and I realized I never actually paid you. Emma blinked in surprise. It was true. They'd been so caught up in daily life that she'd forgotten about wages entirely. I have room and board. That's not enough, not nearly enough for all you've done. He pulled out a small leather pouch. This is what I owe you for the past 3 months, plus extra for making this place worth coming home to. Emma took the pouch, feeling its weight. It was more than generous, enough to buy passage back east if she wanted, enough to start over somewhere else. Caleb, this is too much. It's yours, he said firmly. What you do with it is your choice. Stay, go, whatever you decide, but I want you to know you have options, real options. You're not trapped here by circumstances. She understood what he was really saying, that if she stayed, it would be by choice, not necessity. It was the gift of freedom, the very thing she'd come west seeking. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded and turned to go, then paused. Emma, I hope you stay. Not because you need to, but because you want to. Because this is home now. After he left, Emma sat on her bed, holding the pouch of money. She could leave, start fresh somewhere else with no complications, no small-town gossip, no uncertain future. But the thought of leaving, of never again seeing Caleb's rare smile, never again working beside him, never again sharing quiet evenings by the fire, made her chest ache with potential loss. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, desperate and alone. But she'd found something better than the security she'd sought. She'd found a place where she belonged, work that mattered, and a man who saw her as herself, not as a disappointment or a burden or a solution to loneliness, but as Emma. Tomorrow, she would tell him she was staying, not for the wages or the roof over her head, but for the possibility of what they were building together. For the first time since her father's death, the future didn't feel like something to be endured. It felt like something to be embraced. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Emma was hanging laundry when a fancy carriage pulled up, entirely out of place on the rough ranch road. A well-dressed woman stepped out, middle-aged and stern-faced, followed by a younger man Emma recognized with a sinking heart, Harold Westbrook. Emma, Harold said, his voice mixing relief with disapproval. Thank God we found you. Harold? What are you doing here? I've come to take you home, of course. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, wrote to Mother about seeing you at the train station. It took some time to track you down, but here we are. The woman, Harold's mother, looked around with obvious distaste. This is where you've been living? Like some common servant? I've been working, Emma said evenly. Honest work for honest pay. Don't be ridiculous, Mrs. Westbrook snapped. Harold has graciously agreed to overlook this adventure of yours. You'll come back to Philadelphia, marry properly, and we'll never speak of this again. Emma felt a laugh bubble up, inappropriate and unstoppable. Overlook? Graciously? Emma, please, Harold said, stepping forward. I know you were grieving your father, not thinking clearly. But this has gone on long enough. You don't belong here. Don't I? Emma looked at him, really looked at him. Soft hands that had never known hard work, clothes that cost more than most ranchers saw in a year, an expression of entitlement that assumed her compliance. And I belong with you? Of course you do. We've been intended for each other since we were children. Intended by whom? Not by me. She saw Caleb approaching from the barn, his expression carefully neutral. Harold, Mrs. Westbrook, this is Mr. Rowan. I work as his housekeeper. For now, Mrs. Westbrook said dismissively. Get your things, girl. We have a train to catch. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Harold's face reddened. Emma, don't be foolish. You can't seriously intend to stay here working as a servant when you could be my wife. I seriously intend to make my own choices, Emma replied. And I choose to stay.
For him? Harold gestured at Caleb with obvious disdain. This cowboy. Caleb stepped forward then, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. I think the lady has made her position clear. You should leave. Who are you to... I'm the man whose property you're on, Caleb said mildly, but there was steel underneath, and I'm asking you to leave. Now. Mrs. Westbrook grabbed Harold's arm. Come. She's made her choice. Let her live with the consequences. Harold looked at Emma one more time. You'll regret this. When you're old and worn out from hard work, when you have nothing to show for your life but calloused hands and a broken back, you'll wish you'd come with me. After they left, Emma stood frozen, the weight of the decision hitting her fully. She'd just refused her last chance at the life she'd been raised for: comfort, respectability, security. You all right? Caleb asked quietly. I don't know, she admitted. I may have just made the biggest mistake of my life. Or the best decision? He paused, then added, That man? You could have loved him? Never, Emma said without hesitation. He would have wanted me to be small, quiet, ornamental. He never would have seen me as I am. And how are you? She turned to face him fully. Strong, capable, worth more than just being someone's proper wife. Yes, Caleb agreed. You are all of that, and more. The way he looked at her then, with admiration and something deeper, warmer, made her breath catch, but before either could speak further, they heard horses approaching. This time it was Sheriff Dixon, his expression grim. Caleb, Miss Emma, he nodded. I've got news you need to hear. Tom Henderson's been arrested. For what? Caleb asked. Fraud, primarily. Turns out he's been advertising for mail-order brides all over the East Coast. Takes their money for supposed travel expenses, then leaves them stranded when they arrive. Miss Emma here was lucky. She was the only one who actually made it to his gate. The others, he met in town and told them the position was filled, left them with nothing. Emma felt sick. How many? 6 that we know of, over the past 2 years. Most were too ashamed to report it, just found their way back east somehow. But the latest one, a Miss Catherine Parker, went straight to the authorities. The sheriff tipped his hat. She's staying at the hotel in town, actually. Might appreciate talking to someone who understands her situation. After the sheriff left, Emma stood in stunned silence. She'd thought Henderson had simply changed his mind about her specifically. But this systematic cruelty was beyond what she'd imagined. I'll take you to town tomorrow, Caleb offered. To see Miss Parker, if you want. Yes, Emma said. I'd like that. The meeting with Catherine Parker proved to be more emotional than Emma had anticipated. The young woman, barely 20, sat in the hotel's small parlor with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. She'd come from Boston with her life savings, only to be turned away by Henderson with a cruel laugh and a suggestion that she try the saloon if she needed work. I sold everything, Catherine whispered to Emma. My mother's jewelry, my father's watch. I thought I was coming to a new life, a respectable marriage. Instead, she broke down sobbing. Emma held her while she cried, remembering her own desperation at Henderson's gate. You're not alone, she said firmly. We'll figure something out. Caleb, who had waited outside to give them privacy, knocked gently. Miss Parker? I've spoken with Reverend Mills. He and his wife have a spare room, and they're willing to take you in while you get back on your feet. Mrs.
Mills could use help with the church school, if you're interested. Catherine looked up with desperate hope. They do that for a stranger? That's what decent people do, Caleb said simply, and there are more decent people out here than you might think. As they helped Catherine get settled with the Mills family, Emma found herself watching Caleb with new eyes. He'd not only arranged accommodation, but had quietly paid for Catherine's room and board for the first month, giving the girl time to establish herself. When Emma tried to thank him, he just shrugged. Could have been you, he said. If I hadn't been riding by that day, if I hadn't stopped. I don't like thinking about what might have happened. But you did stop, Emma reminded him. You chose to help a stranger when you had no obligation to. Maybe I recognize something in you, he said quietly. A survivor, someone who wouldn't let circumstances break them. They rode home in comfortable silence, but Emma noticed Caleb seemed preoccupied. When they reached the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon, but held her hands a moment longer than necessary. Emma, there's something I need to tell you. About why I've been living alone out here. Why I haven't been to town much until recently. She waited, sensing this was important. I was married before, he said, the words coming hard. During the war. Her name was Margaret. We had 3 days together before I had to leave for battle. He released her hands and turned away, staring at the horizon. She died while I was gone. Cholera took her and half the town. I didn't even know until I came home 6 months later. Emma's heart ached for him. Caleb, I'm so sorry. After that, I couldn't stay in Virginia. Every street, every building reminded me of her, so I came west, built this place, and told myself I was done with caring about anyone that way. He turned back to her. Then you showed up at Henderson's gate, proud and desperate and brave all at once, and everything I'd told myself for 3 years just crumbled. Emma couldn't breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying that having you here has changed everything. This house isn't just a shelter anymore. It's a home. The days aren't just something to endure. They're something to look forward to. And He stopped, struggling for words. I'm not good at this. Margaret always said I was better with horses than words. You're doing fine, Emma whispered. I'm trying to say that if you want to stay, really stay, not just as my housekeeper. I'd like that. More than like it. He stopped again, frustrated with his own inarticulateness. Emma stepped closer to him. Caleb Rowan, are you trying to propose to me? I'm making a mess of it, he admitted. I had it all planned out, what I'd say, how I'd say it. But looking at you now, all the words just flew away. He took a breath. Emma Caraway, you came here to marry a stranger. Would you consider marrying a friend instead? Someone who knows you're strong and capable and too good for him, but who promises to spend every day trying to deserve you. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. You already deserve me, she said. You have since the day you refused to leave me stranded at that gate. Is that a yes? That's a yes. His kiss was gentle, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear. Emma kissed him back with all the certainty she felt, all the belonging she'd found in this unexpected place with this unexpected man. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was smiling in a way she'd never seen before, unguarded, purely happy. We should tell people, make it official. People already assume anyway, Emma laughed. Sarah Watson told me the whole town's been placing bets on when you'd finally propose. Sarah Watson needs to mind her own business, Caleb grumbled, but he was still smiling. They were married 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning with the mountains painted gold by autumn aspens. The ceremony was simple, held at the church with most of the valley in attendance. Catherine Parker stood as Emma's witness, having flourished under the Mills' care and her new position as assistant teacher. Jim Miller stood for Caleb, grumbling good-naturedly about having to wear his Sunday suit. Emma wore a dress she'd made herself from cream-colored wool, practical but pretty, with small pearl buttons she'd salvaged from one of her Philadelphia dresses. Caleb wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. About time, someone muttered, as Reverend Mills asked if anyone objected, drawing laughter from the congregation. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. The community had come together to provide food, Mrs. Dobson's famous apple pie, the Miller's cider, fresh bread from the Watsons' cook. Even some of Henderson's former ranch hands showed up, the property having been sold to pay his debts and fines. As the sun set and the dancing began, Emma found herself on the porch with Mary Dobson, watching Caleb attempt to dance with little Lucy Baxter standing on his boots. You've done well for yourself, Mary said. Better than if things had gone according to plan. Yes, Emma agreed. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. He loves you, you know, really loves you. The whole town can see it. Emma watched her husband, carefully spin Lucy around, making the child giggle with delight. I love him too, more than I thought possible. Good, Mary said firmly. That's how it should be. As winter approached, Emma and Caleb settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The awkwardness Emma had feared never materialized. Instead, they moved around each other with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been together far longer than a few months. The first snow came early, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Emma stood at the window, mesmerized by the transformation of the landscape she'd come to love. "Different from Philadelphia snow, I imagine," Caleb said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Everything's different here," she agreed, leaning back against him. "Cleaner, somehow, more honest. Colder, too," he warned. "Wait until January. You'll be cursing the cold and dreaming of city steam heat." But Emma didn't curse the cold when it came. Instead, she found beauty in the frozen creeks, the frost patterns on windows, the way their breath clouded in the barn as they tended the animals together. The house stayed warm with the fire Caleb kept constantly fed, and the long evenings gave them time to talk, really talk, in ways they hadn't before. Caleb told her about the war, slowly, in pieces, about the battles that still visited him in nightmares, the friends lost, the boy he'd been before, and the man he'd become after. Emma told him about her mother's long illness, her father's slow decline after her death, the suffocating expectations of Philadelphia society. "We're both refugees in a way," Emma said one night as they lay in bed, listening to wind howl around the corners of the house. "Running from different things, but running all the same." "Not running anymore," Caleb corrected, pulling her closer. "Not now that we've found where we belong." In December, a letter arrived that threatened to shatter their peace. It was from Caleb's sister in Virginia, informing him that their father was dying and begging him to come home. "I haven't spoken to him in 4 years," Caleb said, staring at the letter. "We argued after Margaret died. He said I was being cowardly, running away. I said things, terrible things." "Do you want to go?" Emma asked gently. "I don't know. Part of me does. He's my father, despite everything. But part of me—" He trailed off. "Is afraid," Emma finished. "Afraid of reopening old wounds, facing old ghosts." "Yes." Emma took his hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want to go, we'll go together. If you want to stay, we'll send a letter. But don't let fear make the decision for you." 2 days later, they were on a train heading east. The journey took a week, giving Caleb time to prepare himself for what awaited. Emma watched him grow more tense with each mile, reverting to the closed-off man she'd first met. "Talk to me," she urged as they crossed into Virginia. "Don't disappear into yourself." "This land," he said, looking out at the rolling hills. "I used to love it. Every hill, every stream. Now all I see is where battles were fought, where friends died. That field there? That's where my unit made camp the night before Cedar Creek. Half of them never made it home." Emma squeezed his hand. "But you did. You survived, built a new life. That matters." "Does it? My father would say I abandoned my duty, my heritage. Your father isn't living your life. You are." The Rowan family plantation was smaller than Emma had expected, and showing signs of the decline that had affected many southern properties since the war. The grand house needed paint, the fences needed mending, and there were too few workers to maintain what had once been prosperous tobacco fields. Caleb's sister Anne met them at the door. She was younger than Caleb, pretty in a faded sort of way with worried eyes and work-worn hands. "Thank God you came," she said, embracing Caleb tightly. "He's been asking for you." "He won't. He won't let go until he sees you." The reunion between father and son was painful to witness. James Rowan, once a powerful man, lay wasted by illness, but his eyes still held the fierce pride Caleb had inherited. "So you came," the elder Rowan said. "Thought you might be too stubborn." "Learned from the best," Caleb replied evenly. "This your wife?" James studied Emma with sharp eyes. "Pretty. Tough, too, from the look of her. Good. You'll need that." Over the next 3 days, father and son slowly, carefully began to bridge the gap between them. Emma often left them alone to talk, helping Anne with household duties and learning more about Caleb's childhood from his sister's stories. "He was different before the war," Anne said as they prepared dinner. "Lighter, somehow. Quick to laugh.
Margaret brought that back for a little while, but when she died, she shook her head. I thought we'd lost him forever. He's finding his way back, Emma said. Slowly, but he's finding it. On the third night, James Rowan took a turn for the worse. The family gathered around his bedside as he struggled for each breath. With effort, he reached for Caleb's hand. I was wrong, he wheezed, about you leaving. You had to find your own way. I see that now. His eyes moved to Emma. Take care of him. He needs someone strong. I will, Emma promised. James Rowan died just before dawn, with his children beside him. The funeral was small. The war and time had claimed many of their neighbors, but those who came spoke of James with respect, if not warmth. After the burial, Anne pulled Caleb aside. The plantation is yours if you want it. Father left it to you in his will. Caleb looked at the land, the house, the weight of history and expectation. Then he looked at Emma. No, he said firmly. This isn't my life anymore. Sell it, use the money to restore what you can, find a good manager. But I won't be coming back. Anne nodded, seemingly relieved. I understand. Your life is elsewhere now. On the train back to Montana, Caleb was quiet but not withdrawn. Emma could see him processing, making peace with the ghosts he'd confronted. Do you regret not staying? She asked as Virginia disappeared behind them. No. That life, that land, it belongs to who I used to be, the man I am now, the life we're building together. That's what's real. He took her hand. Thank you for coming with me. I couldn't have done it alone. You'll never have to do anything alone again, Emma promised. They returned to the ranch to find that their neighbors had cared for everything in their absence. The horses were fed, the chickens tended, even the house had been kept clean. A note from Mary Dobson said simply, "This is what neighbors do." As winter deepened, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly. The morning sickness she attributed to bad meat, the fatigue she blamed on the cold. But when Mary Dobson took one look at her and said, "How far along are you, dear?" Emma couldn't deny it anymore. Caleb's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy, fear, wonder, and protectiveness all flashed across his face before he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. You're not disappointed? We've only been married a few months. Disappointed? He pulled back to look at her face. Emma, I thought I'd lost any chance at a family when Margaret died. It's a miracle. The pregnancy changed the rhythm of their days. Caleb became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything more strenuous than sewing. Emma had to firmly remind him that pioneer women had been having babies while maintaining households for generations. I'm pregnant, not invalid, she said one morning when he tried to stop her from collecting eggs. I need to stay active. But she secretly loved his concern, the way he'd place his hand on her growing belly with wonder, the plans he made for expanding the house to accommodate their growing family. Spring arrived with its usual mix of hope and hard work. The garden needed planting, the new calves needed tending, and Emma insisted on participating despite her expanding waistline. She found that the physical work actually helped with the discomforts of pregnancy, and the fresh air was better than being cooped up inside. One afternoon in May, as Emma was working in the garden, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood run cold. Tom Henderson sat on his horse at their gate, but he wasn't alone. He'd brought 6 men with him, all armed, all looking like trouble. Afternoon, Mrs. Rowan, Henderson called mockingly. He'd been released from jail after serving only 3 months, his lawyer arguing that the mail-order bride scheme, while morally reprehensible, hadn't technically broken enough laws to warrant a longer sentence. Mr. Henderson, Emma replied evenly, you're not welcome here. Now, that's not very neighborly. I just came to see how the happy couple is doing. Heard congratulations are in order, marriage and a baby on the way. His eyes traveled over her obviously pregnant form in a way that made her skin crawl. Caleb sure didn't waste any time, did he? State your business or leave. My business? Henderson laughed. My business is that your husband cost me everything. My reputation, my money, my ranch, all because he had to play hero for a woman who wasn't worth the trouble. Before Emma could respond, she heard the rifle cock behind her. Caleb stood in the doorway of the barn, his gun trained on Henderson. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my property," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. "7 of us. 1 of you," Henderson pointed out. "Those aren't good odds." "Maybe not," Jim Miller said, riding up from the east with his own rifle ready. "But 2 of us makes it more interesting." Bob Watson appeared from the west, then the Dobsons' son from the north. Within minutes, a dozen of their neighbors had materialized, all armed, all facing down Henderson and his hired thugs. "Seems like you miscalculated, Tom," Sheriff Dixon said, arriving last but with the authority of law behind him. "Now you can leave peaceful-like, or I can arrest you for trespassing and threatening behavior. Your choice." Henderson's face was purple with rage, but he wasn't stupid enough to fight those odds. "This isn't over, Rowan," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Caleb said. "You come near my wife or my property again, and I won't wait for the sheriff." "That's not a threat, Tom. That's a promise." After Henderson and his men rode off, Emma found herself surrounded by concerned neighbors. Mary Dobson fussed over her, insisting she sit down and drink some water. The men congregated around Caleb, discussing whether Henderson would try again. "He won't," Sheriff Dixon said firmly. "I'll make sure of that. He steps 1 foot wrong, and he'll be back in jail for a long stretch this time." That night, as they lay in bed, Emma could feel Caleb's tension in the rigid way he held himself. "He scared you," she said. "It wasn't a question. He threatened you, you and the baby. That's—" He struggled for words. "That's everything. You're everything." Emma turned to face him, placing his hand on her belly where the baby was kicking. "We're fine. The baby's fine. Henderson is just a bitter man lashing out at anyone he can blame for his own failures." "I should have killed him," Caleb said quietly. "When he first abandoned you, when he caused that flood, today, I should have ended it." "No," Emma said firmly. "That's not who you are. You're a good man, Caleb Rowan. A man who builds things, not one who destroys them. Our child will grow up knowing their father chose what was right over what was easy." The baby came on a sweltering July night, with the doctor from town and Mary Dobson attending. Caleb paced the main room like a caged animal while Emma labored, flinching at every sound from the bedroom. "First babies take time," Jim Miller said, having come to keep Caleb company. "My eldest took near about 20 hours to make his appearance." 20 hours? Caleb looked sick at the thought, but their baby was more considerate, arriving after only 8 hours of labor. When Mary finally opened the bedroom door, her face wreathed in smiles, Caleb nearly knocked her over in his rush to get to Emma. She lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Meet your son," she said, offering the baby to Caleb. He took the infant with shaking hands, staring down at the red, wrinkled face with absolute awe. "A son. We have a son, James," Emma said. "After your father. If that's all right." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "James Rowan. Yes, it's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect." The baby's arrival brought a stream of visitors over the following weeks. The women brought food and advice. The men brought gifts. A rocking horse Jim Miller had carved, a small saddle from the Watsons for when he's older, a beautiful quilt from the church ladies. Even Catherine Parker came to visit, now engaged to the sheriff's deputy and glowing with her own happiness. "You saved me," she told Emma. "That day at the hotel, when I thought my life was over, you and Mr. Rowan showed me that good people still existed." "You saved yourself," Emma corrected. "We just helped a little." As summer turned to autumn, their life settled into a new rhythm accommodating baby James's needs. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, often taking the night feeding so Emma could rest, carrying the baby around the ranch in a sling Emma had fashioned, talking to him constantly about the animals, the land, their plans for the future. One evening, as the first frost touched the grass and the aspen leaves turned gold, Emma stood on the porch watching Caleb show their son the sunset. The baby, now 3 months old, gazed up at his father with absolute trust and fascination. "What are you thinking?"
Caleb asked, noticing her watching them. That a year ago I was standing at Henderson's gate, thinking my life was over. And now, she gestured at the scene before her, husband, child, home, the land spreading golden in the evening light. And now? Now I know that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that the life we plan isn't always the life we need. She moved to join them, Caleb's arm coming around her automatically. I came west to marry a stranger, and I did. But somewhere along the way, that stranger became my best friend, my partner, my love. Emma, Caleb said softly, you saved me. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, surviving but not living. You brought life back to this place. You brought love back to me. Baby James gurgled between them, and they both laughed. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. That winter, Henderson made one last attempt at revenge. He tried to dam the creek upstream, cutting off water to Caleb's ranch. But he hadn't counted on the community's response. Every rancher in the valley rode out to tear down the illegal dam, and this time, Sheriff Dixon had enough evidence to arrest Henderson for attempted destruction of property in violation of water rights. He was sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. As the sheriff led him away, Henderson shot one last venomous look at Emma, who stood with baby James in her arms, surrounded by neighbors who'd become family. It's really over, Caleb said, pulling her close. No, Emma corrected. It's really beginning. Spring arrived with unusual warmth that year, melting the snow earlier than expected and bringing with it both promise and unexpected challenges. James was crawling now, exploring every corner of the house with determined curiosity, and Emma found herself constantly vigilant as she balanced watching him with the demands of the ranch. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Caleb was out checking the cattle, Emma was baking bread while James played with wooden blocks on the kitchen floor, when a rider approached at full gallop. Through the window, Emma recognized young Tommy Miller, Jim's eldest son, his face white with panic. "Mrs. Rowan!" he called before his horse had even stopped. "You need to come quick. There's been an accident at the mine. Cave in. My pa says to bring any medical supplies you have." The silver mine in the hills had opened 6 months ago, bringing new prosperity to the valley, but also new dangers. Emma's heart sank as she quickly gathered bandages, laudanum, and anything else that might help. She bundled James up and was ready to go when Caleb rode in, having seen Tommy's frantic arrival. "How bad?" Caleb asked the boy. "Real bad, Mr. Rowan. 7 men trapped, maybe more. They got 3 out already, but—" Tommy's voice broke. He was only 16, trying so hard to be a man. "Take Emma and the baby to town," Caleb told Tommy. "I'll gather more men and meet you at the mine." The scene at the mine was chaos. Women stood in clusters, some crying, others stone-faced with worry. Men worked frantically at the blocked entrance, their faces grim. Emma handed James to Mary Dobson and immediately went to help Doc Peterson with the injured who'd been pulled out. One of them was Samuel Watson, Sarah's older brother. His leg was crushed, bent at an impossible angle. Sarah knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she held his hand. "Please," she begged Emma, their past tensions forgotten. "Please, help him." Emma and Doc Peterson worked for hours on the injured while the rescue efforts continued. The sun climbed high, then began its descent, and still men dug at the collapsed mine entrance. Caleb was among them, his shirt soaked with sweat, his hands bloody from moving rocks. Then, just as hope was fading, they broke through. The remaining trapped miners were pulled out one by one. 5 survived. 2 didn't. Among the dead was Robert Henley, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 3 young children. The funeral 2 days later drew the entire valley. Emma stood with Caleb, James in her arms, watching as Margaret Henley tried to be strong for her children. After the service, Emma approached her. "Mrs. Henley, I know we don't know each other well, but if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." Margaret's composure cracked. "I don't know what we'll do." Robert handled everything. "I don't even know how much money we have or how to run the homestead, and with the baby coming." Without hesitation, Emma said, "Come stay with us. We have room, and you shouldn't be alone right now." Caleb, overhearing, immediately agreed. Robert was a good man. It's the least we can do. Margaret Henley and her children moved in 3 days later. The house that had once seemed spacious suddenly felt full to bursting with 3 additional children ranging from 4 to 10 years old, but Emma wouldn't have had it any other way. She remembered too well the feeling of being alone and desperate. The arrangement, meant to be temporary, evolved into something more permanent as weeks turned into months. Margaret proved to be a tremendous help around the house, and her children, after initial shyness, became like siblings to James. 10-year-old Ruth was especially helpful, often watching the baby while Emma and Margaret worked. "You've given us a home," Margaret said one evening as they prepared dinner together. "I can never repay that." "Family doesn't keep ledgers," Emma replied, realizing as she said it that it was true. This makeshift, assembled family felt as real as any blood relation. That summer brought other changes too. The railroad announced plans to extend a spur line to Miller's Creek, which would mean easier transport for cattle and crops, but also an influx of new people. The town began to grow, with new businesses opening and land prices rising. "We should buy the Henderson property," Caleb said one evening, studying a map spread on the kitchen table. "It's going up for auction next month." Emma looked at him in surprise. "Can we afford it?" "With what the cattle brought this year and the money from my father's estate that Anne sent, yes. It would double our land, give us access to better grazing and water rights." The irony wasn't lost on Emma. They would own the very land where she'd been abandoned, but there was poetic justice in it too, turning Henderson's loss into their gain. The auction was held on a blazing hot day in August. Several buyers from back east had come, drawn by the railroad news, but when Caleb made his bid, the local ranchers backed him, refusing to bid against one of their own. He got the property for a fair price, and as the auctioneer's hammer fell, Emma felt a chapter closing and a new one beginning. They rode out to inspect their new property the next day, bringing James and the Henley children along. The Henderson house stood empty, already showing signs of neglect, but structurally sound. "We could fix it up," Caleb mused. "Rent it out, maybe to one of the new families coming in. Or," Emma said slowly, an idea forming, "we could do something else with it." She explained her vision, a school, a proper one, not just the church doubling as a classroom. With the town growing, they needed better education for the children. The house could be converted, with living quarters for a teacher upstairs and classrooms below. Caleb studied her with admiration. "You want to build a school on the spot where Henderson abandoned you." "I want to build something good where something bad happened," Emma corrected. "Transform it into something that serves the community." The idea took hold quickly. The town council, such as it was, embraced the plan. Donations poured in, lumber from the sawmill, labor from neighbors, books from a philanthropist in Denver who'd heard about their project. Even Sarah Watson, now married to a banker from the territorial capital, sent money for supplies. Catherine Parker, who'd been assisting at the church school, was the obvious choice for teacher. She and her husband, Deputy Marcus Wells, moved into the renovated upper floor, while the lower level became 2 bright classrooms. The school opened in September with 23 students, including the Henley children. Emma stood with Caleb at the opening ceremony, watching as Reverend Mills blessed the building and Catherine rang the bell for the first time. "From an abandoned bride to a school benefactor," Mary Dobson said, coming up beside them. "That's quite a journey, Emma Rowan." "Every journey has to start somewhere," Emma replied, "even the difficult ones." That autumn, as the leaves turned and the harvest came in, Emma discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she recognized the signs immediately. Caleb's joy was tempered with worry. Her first pregnancy had been relatively easy, but they both knew each birth carried risks. "We'll be fine," Emma assured him, though she had her own fears. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Caleb said, which made her laugh despite her queasy stomach. Margaret Henley, now delivered of her own baby, a daughter she named Hope, proved invaluable during Emma's pregnancy. The 2 women had become like sisters, sharing the work and the worries of managing their expanded household. Winter came early and harsh that year. By December, snow had blocked many of the roads. isolating ranches from each other and from town. It was during one of these storms that Emma went into labor, a month earlier than expected. There was no way to get Dr. Peterson through the snow. Caleb was near panic, but Margaret took charge with calm efficiency. "I've delivered 3 of my own children when the doctor couldn't make it in time," she said. "We can do this." The labor was long and difficult. Emma could hear Caleb pacing in the other room, sometimes talking to James, sometimes praying, something she'd rarely heard him do. The Henley children huddled together, the older ones keeping the younger ones calm. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, Emma's daughter was born. She was small but perfect, with a fierce cry that announced her determination to be heard. "She's a fighter," Margaret said, placing the baby in Emma's arms.
Like her mother. Caleb, allowed in at last, looked at his daughter with the same awe he'd shown with James. "What should we name her?" "Grace," Emma said without hesitation, "for the grace that brought us together and the grace that's seen us through." Grace Rowan proved to be as spirited as her birth suggested. By spring, when she was sitting up and babbling constantly, it was clear she'd inherited her mother's determination and her father's stubborn streak. "Lord help us when she's older," Caleb said one day, watching Grace systematically empty a basket of clean laundry while James tried to stop her. "She's going to be a handful." "She's going to be magnificent," Emma corrected. The railroad spur was completed that spring, and with it came an influx of new settlers. The town expanded rapidly. A hotel, a newspaper, a proper doctor's office, even a small bank. Land prices soared, and suddenly the Rowan Ranch, with its doubled acreage and prime location, was worth a small fortune.
"We could sell," Caleb said one evening, going over the offers that had come in. "Move somewhere else, start fresh with enough money to live comfortable forever." Emma looked around the room, at Margaret nursing Hope, at the Henley children doing their homework at the kitchen table, at James playing with his toy horses while Grace watched from her cradle. "This is our home," she said simply. "You don't sell home." But the changes brought challenges too. Some of the new arrivals were less scrupulous than the original settlers. Cattle began disappearing, fences were cut, and there were disputes over water rights that sometimes turned violent. The worst incident came in late summer. Emma was in the garden with the children when she heard horses approaching fast. 6 riders she didn't recognize stopped at the gate. Their leader, a man with cold eyes and expensive clothes, dismounted without invitation. "Mrs. Rowan? I'm Jacob Sterling. I represent a consortium of Eastern investors interested in purchasing your ranch." "It's not for sale," Emma said firmly, gathering the children behind her. "Everything's for sale at the right price," Sterling said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We're prepared to make a very generous offer." "The answer is no." Sterling's expression hardened. "You should discuss it with your husband. Sometimes women don't understand the full implications of business decisions." "I understand perfectly," Emma said. "Now get off our property." Sterling remounted, but his parting words were chilling. "This valley is changing, Mrs. Rowan. Those who don't change with it tend to get left behind, or buried under it." When Caleb heard about the encounter, his face went dark with anger. He rode straight to town to see Sheriff Dixon, but there was little the sheriff could do about veiled threats. "Sterling's been buying up land all over," Dixon said. "Some folks sold willing, others, well, they sold after their barns burned down or their cattle disappeared." "He won't drive us out," Caleb said grimly. The pressure intensified over the following weeks. First, some of their cattle were found shot. Then, someone poisoned the creek that fed their well, though thankfully Caleb discovered it before any person or animal drank from it. Finally, one night, they woke to find the barn on fire. The whole community rallied to fight the blaze. They saved the barn, though it was damaged, and more importantly, they saved all the animals. As dawn broke over the smoke-damaged structure, Jim Miller voiced what everyone was thinking. "This has gone too far. Sterling needs to be stopped." The ranchers formed an association for mutual protection. They hired guards, established night patrols, and made it clear to Sterling and his associates that the valley wouldn't be intimidated. The territorial governor, alerted to the situation, sent federal marshals to investigate. The investigation revealed that Sterling's consortium was built on fraud and intimidation across multiple territories. He was arrested along with several associates, though he managed to avoid conviction on technicalities. But his reputation was ruined and the consortium dissolved. "It's over," Sheriff Dixon told them. "Sterling's heading back east with his tail between his legs." But the incident had changed things. The valley was no longer the isolated, peaceful place it had been. Progress had come, bringing both opportunity and danger. One evening, as Emma and Caleb sat on the porch watching their children play, James now toddling after the Henley children, Grace crawling determinedly after him, Margaret joined them with a letter in her hand. "My sister in California wants me to come live with her," she said quietly. "She's widowed too, has a big house, room for all of us." Emma's heart sank. "You're leaving." "I don't want to," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "You've been more family to me than my own blood. But I can't keep imposing." "You're not imposing," Caleb said firmly. "You're family, like Emma said. This is your home as long as you want it. But you need your space, your privacy." "You've been more than generous, but what if," Emma interrupted, an idea forming, "we built you a house? On the property, close enough that we're still together, but separate enough that you have your own space." Caleb caught on immediately. "The old Henderson house site. We cleared it for the school, but there's plenty of room to build another house nearby. You could have your own place, but still be part of the ranch." Margaret looked between them, hope and disbelief warring on her face. "You'd do that?" "Family takes care of family," Emma said simply. The house was built that fall, a modest but comfortable home just a quarter-mile from the main ranch house. Close enough that the children could run between the houses, far enough that both families had privacy. It was perfect. As winter approached again, Emma stood in her kitchen, now expanded to accommodate their growing household's needs, preparing for their third Thanksgiving together. The table would be full. Their family, the Henleys, the Millers, Doc Peterson, Catherine and Marcus, even Sarah Watson and her husband were coming from the capital. "Remember that first night?" Caleb asked, coming up behind her. "You standing at Henderson's gate, nowhere to go?" "I remember," Emma said, leaning back against him. "You offered me one night's shelter." "Best offer I ever made," he said, kissing the top of her head. James ran through, chasing one of the barn cats, with Grace crawling after him with determined speed. The Henley children were helping set the table, arguing good-naturedly about placement. Margaret was nursing Hope by the fire, humming contentedly. "We built something good here," Emma said. "We built something real," Caleb corrected. "From the worst beginning." "The best endings sometimes come from the worst beginnings," Emma said. The first snow began to fall outside, gentle and clean, covering the land in pristine white. But inside, the house was warm and full of light, full of family, both born and chosen, full of the life Emma had never dared dream of when she stood abandoned at that gate. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Caleb opened it to find a young woman, obviously pregnant, shivering in the cold. She held a crumpled piece of paper and had a trunk beside her. "Please," she said through chattering teeth, "I'm looking for the Baxter Ranch. I'm supposed to marry John Baxter, but I can't find—" Emma and Caleb exchanged looks. John Baxter had died 2 years ago. "Come in," Emma said immediately, guiding the woman to the fire. "Come in and get warm. We'll sort everything out." As she helped the stranger out of her wet coat, Emma caught Caleb's eye. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. Another lost soul at another gate, another chance to transform abandonment into belonging. "What's your name?" Emma asked the woman. "Alice. Alice Thornton." "Well, Alice," Emma said, "you're safe now. Whatever happens next, you're safe." Margaret brought tea, the children gathered around curiously, and Caleb quietly moved Alice's trunk inside. Another stranger to fold into their ever-expanding definition of family. Another story beginning where another had tried to end. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the fire burned bright and warm. The house that had once sheltered a single lonely man now overflowed with life, with purpose, with love. It wasn't the life Emma had planned when she'd answered that advertisement. Wasn't the future she'd imagined on that westbound train. It was something better, something built from choice and chance, from courage and compassion, from the simple act of refusing to leave someone standing alone at a gate. "Thank you," Alice whispered, clutching her teacup. "Thank you for taking me in." "That's what we do here," Emma said simply. "We take care of each other." Through the window, she could see the lights from Margaret's house, warm against the winter darkness. Beyond that, the school Catherine would open again come Monday. Further still, the town that had grown and changed, full of people who'd become friends, neighbors, family. This was what she'd built with Caleb, stone by stone, choice by choice. Not just a ranch or a house, but a community, a place where abandoned brides could become beloved wives, where widows found new family, where strangers discovered home. "We'll send word to town in the morning," Caleb was telling Alice. "Find out what happened, figure out your options. But tonight, you rest. You're among friends." Emma moved to stand beside him, his arm coming around her automatically. Together they watched as their extended family welcomed this newest stranger, as they had once welcomed each other. Grace had crawled over to Alice and was patting her knee with chubby hands, making the woman smile through her tears. James was showing her his toy horses, chattering about each one. The Henley children were setting another place at the table without being asked. "We've come far from that gate," Caleb murmured in her ear. "Not far," Emma corrected. "We've just learned what to do with gates, open them, walk through them, and help others do the same." The smell of bread baking filled the house, mixing with the pine scent from the fire and the lavender sachets Emma had placed throughout the rooms. It smelled like home, like belonging, like the life she'd never known she wanted until she'd built it with her own hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch needed tending, the children needed raising, Alice would need help navigating whatever came next. The town would continue growing, bringing new opportunities and new threats. There would be droughts and storms, births and deaths, joy and sorrow. But tonight, surrounded by the family they'd gathered and grown, Emma knew they would face it all together. She'd come west seeking survival and found so much more. Love, purpose, community, home. The abandoned bride had become the cornerstone of something beautiful and lasting. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb squeezed her hand. "No regrets?" Emma looked at him. This man who'd refused to leave her stranded, who'd offered shelter that became sanctuary, partnership that became love, and smiled. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Alice Thornton's story unfolded over the next few days like a familiar song with different words. John Baxter had indeed placed an advertisement for a bride, but he'd died in a riding accident 6 weeks before Alice arrived. His brother, who'd inherited the ranch, knew nothing about the arrangement and had no interest in honoring it. Alice had spent her last dollar on the journey west, sold everything she owned, and now found herself stranded just as Emma had been. "The difference is," Alice said, sitting at Emma's kitchen table while Grace played at her feet, "you had Caleb to help you. I have no one." "You have us," Emma said firmly, "and that's not nothing." Caleb had ridden to the Baxter Ranch to verify Alice's story and returned with troubling news. Not only was John dead, but his brother Samuel was selling the ranch to Sterling's former associates, who were regrouping under a different name. "They're circling like vultures," Caleb said that evening as they discussed the situation, "buying up every piece of land they can get." "What about Alice?" Margaret asked, having joined them for dinner as she did most nights. "She can't go back east, and she has a baby coming." Emma had been thinking about this. Catherine mentioned needing help at the school. With enrollment growing, she's overwhelmed. Alice was a teacher before. She mentioned it on the train. She could assist Catherine and live in the small room behind the school until she figures out something more permanent. "That's a temporary solution," Caleb pointed out. "All solutions start as temporary," Emma replied. Ours did. They presented the idea to Alice the next morning. The relief on her face was painful to see. "You'd do that for me? But you don't even know me." "We know enough," Emma said. "We know you're brave enough to travel across the country for a new life. We know you're facing hardship with dignity. That's enough to start with." Alice moved into the school's back room that week, and Catherine welcomed the help enthusiastically. The arrangement worked well. Alice was educated and patient with children, and her presence meant Catherine could divide the students by age and rather than teaching them all together. As autumn progressed toward winter,
The ranch thrived despite the attempts at intimidation. The cattle brought good prices at market. The expanded acreage meant more grazing land, and the harvest had been bountiful. But Emma noticed Caleb growing restless, spending long hours staring at maps and territorial surveys. "What's troubling you?" she asked one evening after the children were asleep. "The valley's changing," he said. "Not just the town growing, but the whole character of it. These investment companies coming in, buying up land to parcel out to settlers who don't know the first thing about ranching. They're going to destroy what we've built here. So we fight them. How? They have money, lawyers, political connections." Emma thought about this. "They have those things, yes, but we have something else. Community. The original settlers, the people who built this valley. We need to organize properly, not just for protection, but for political power." The idea took shape over the following weeks. Emma and Caleb called a meeting of all the established ranchers and farmers. The schoolhouse was packed with people standing along the walls. Sheriff Dixon was there, Reverend Mills, Doc Peterson, all the families who'd carved this valley out of wilderness. "We need to incorporate," Emma said, standing before them all. She'd prepared carefully for this moment. "Form a proper town government with elected officials, laws, taxes for infrastructure. If we're organized, we have a say in what happens here." "Taxes," someone grumbled from the back. "Small ones," Emma continued. "Just enough to pay for what we need, a proper sheriff's department, road maintenance, maybe even a hospital someday. But more importantly, it gives us legal standing. We can pass ordinances about land use, water rights, business practices." Jim Miller stood up. "Emma's right. If we don't organize ourselves, outsiders will organize us. I nominate Caleb for mayor." Caleb immediately protested, but the nomination was seconded and thirded. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Emma watched her husband's face as he accepted, reluctant but determined. He'd never wanted to be a leader, but he'd become one anyway. The incorporation of Miller's Creek was finalized in November. Caleb threw himself into his new role with the same intensity he brought to ranching, working to establish fair ordinances and protect the interests of the original settlers while still allowing for growth. It was during this time that Emma received an unexpected letter. The return address made her hands tremble. It was from Harold Westbrook's attorney in Philadelphia. "Your father's former partner has died," the letter read. "In reviewing his papers, we discovered documentation proving he owed your father a substantial sum, $50,000, which was never paid due to fraudulent bookkeeping. The court has ruled in favor of your father's estate. As his sole heir, this money is yours." Emma sat down hard, the letter fluttering from her fingers. $50,000. It was a fortune, enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives without working another day. Caleb found her there an hour later, still staring at the letter. He read it, whistled low, then sat beside her. "This changes things." "Does it?" Emma asked. "We have everything we need. A home, family, purpose. What would money change?" "We could do more," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Not for ourselves, but for the valley. That hospital you mentioned, better equipment for the school, maybe even a library." Emma looked at him with such love it took her breath away. Another man might have seen personal opportunity in this windfall. Caleb saw community benefit. "We'll put it to good use," she agreed, "but carefully, thoughtfully. Money can destroy as easily as build." They kept the windfall quiet, but began implementing improvements. The school got new books and supplies. Doc Peterson got equipment for a proper clinic. They established a fund for families facing hardship, administered quietly through Reverend Mills. Winter came harsh that year, with blizzards that isolated ranches for weeks. It was during one of these storms that Alice went into labor. The snow was too deep to get her to Doc Peterson, so Emma and Margaret delivered the baby in the small room behind the school, with Catherine boiling water and keeping the fire going. The labor was long and difficult, complicated by the baby being turned wrong. Emma remembered her own difficult delivery with Grace, how frightened she'd been, and tried to keep Alice calm even as her own fear grew. "You're doing fine," she lied smoothly as Alice screamed through another contraction. "The baby's just taking their time." Margaret caught her eye, worry clear on her face. The baby needed to be turned, a dangerous procedure in the best of circumstances. Emma had read about it, but never done it. "I can try," Margaret whispered. I saw a midwife do it once. Together, with infinite care and Alice crying in pain, they managed to turn the baby. Dawn was breaking through the storm clouds when Alice's son was finally born, small but healthy, wailing with impressive volume. "He's perfect," Emma told Alice, placing the baby in her arms. "You did wonderfully." Alice, exhausted but radiant, looked at her son with wonder. "I'll name him John," she said, "after the man who brought me here, even if he never knew it." Caring for a newborn alone while teaching proved impossible, so Alice moved back to the ranch temporarily. The house was crowded but warm, filled with children's laughter and baby cries. Emma often found herself standing in the doorway of the main room, watching the controlled chaos with deep satisfaction. James, now 4, had appointed himself protector of all the younger children. Grace, at 2, was a whirlwind of energy and determination. The Henley children helped with chores without being asked. Baby Hope toddled after Grace, and now Baby John added his voice to the mix. "We need a bigger house," Caleb said one evening, surveying the crowded scene. "Or," Emma suggested, "we build Alice her own place too. Close by, like Margaret's." "A community," Caleb mused. "Our own little town within the town." That spring, they did exactly that. A small house for Alice and John rose on the other side of the main ranch house. The 3 homes formed a triangle with shared yard space in the middle where the children could play safely. Gardens were planted, fences built, and suddenly they had created something unique. A family compound where no one was related by blood, but everyone was bound by choice and circumstance. The arrangement drew attention. Other single women, widows, and abandoned families began arriving in Miller's Creek, having heard of the place where such people could find not just shelter, but dignity and purpose. Not all stayed at the ranch. The town itself was growing more welcoming. But Emma and Caleb helped where they could, finding jobs, homes, connections. "You're building something important here," Reverend Mills told Emma one Sunday after church. "A new model for community, for family." "We're just doing what needs doing," Emma replied. But she understood what he meant. They were proving that family didn't require blood, that community could be created through compassion and shared purpose. That summer brought both joy and sorrow. Joy when Sarah Watson arrived for a visit with her twin daughters, her marriage having produced the children she'd always wanted. The reunion was warm, old tensions long forgotten. "You were right to refuse my brother that first day in the store," Sarah told Emma as they watched their children play together. "You had bigger things waiting for you." Sorrow came with news that Tom Henderson had died in prison, killed in a fight with another inmate. Emma felt no satisfaction at the news, only a kind of sad relief that his bitter chapter was finally closed. "He brought it on himself," Caleb said, but Emma heard the regret in his voice. They'd both hoped Henderson might find redemption, might use his time in prison to become a better man. Now that possibility was gone forever. The following months brought rapid change to Miller's Creek. The railroad's full service began, bringing trainloads of new settlers. Some were good people looking for fresh starts. Others were speculators and opportunists. As mayor, Caleb worked tirelessly to maintain balance, to preserve what made the valley special while allowing for necessary growth. One challenge came from an unexpected source. A group of investors wanted to build a large hotel and casino, arguing it would bring prosperity to the town. The community was divided. Some saw economic opportunity, others feared the corruption such establishments often brought. Emma organized the women of the town in opposition. They petitioned, attended council meetings, made their voices heard. The debate grew heated, with accusations flying on both sides. The pivotal moment came at a town meeting where the final vote would be taken. Emma stood to speak, her voice clear and strong. "We came to this valley seeking something," she said. "Some came for land, some for gold, some for freedom. I came as a mail-order bride, abandoned at a gate, with nothing but hope. What I found was community. What we built together was home. A casino might bring money, but at what cost? Our children's innocence, our town's character, our sense of who we are? Money isn't the only measure of prosperity. Sometimes the richest communities are those that know what they won't sell." The vote was close, but the casino was rejected. The investors left, bitter, warning that Miller's Creek would regret passing up such opportunity. But that night,
The town celebrated in the square, fiddles playing, children dancing, neighbors embracing. "You did that," Caleb told Emma as they danced, Grace on his feet, James spinning with Alice. "We did that," Emma corrected. "All of us, together." As autumn arrived again, Emma realized she was pregnant for the third time. At 32, she was older than ideal for childbearing, and Caleb was worried. "We have enough children," he said. "Between ours and everyone else's, the house is full." "Hearts expand," Emma replied, hand on her still flat belly. "There's always room for one more." This pregnancy was harder than the others. Emma tired easily, her back ached constantly, and Doc Peterson ordered bed rest for the last month. It frustrated her to be still while life bustled around her, but the women of her extended family stepped in seamlessly. Margaret managed the household, Alice helped with the children, Catherine brought lessons for James, and even Sarah made the journey from the capital to help. "Look at us," Sarah said one afternoon as several women worked around Emma's bed, mending clothes and preparing preserves. "Who would have thought that day in the store that we'd become this?" "Family chooses you sometimes," Margaret said, "if you're lucky." The baby came during the first snowfall of winter, 2 weeks early, but healthy. Another daughter, whom they named Faith. 3 children, Caleb marveled, holding the tiny bundle. "When I lived alone out here, I never imagined." "Life rarely goes as imagined," Emma said, watching him fall in love with another daughter. "It goes better." That winter was remembered as one of the hardest in the valley's history. Blizzard after blizzard isolated ranches, collapsed roofs, killed cattle. The town pulled together as never before. Caleb organized rescue parties for stranded families. Emma, despite having a newborn, coordinated relief efforts from her bed. The school became a shelter for those whose homes were damaged. It was during the worst of the storms that a miracle occurred. A train, trapped by snowslides both ahead and behind, carried something precious, a doctor from Chicago, heading to California, who was also a trained surgeon. Doc Peterson had been overwhelmed with pneumonia cases, and several people needed operations he couldn't perform. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett was her name, and she was everything Miller's Creek had never seen. A female doctor, educated at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, brilliant and bold. She saved 6 lives during those 2 weeks while the train was trapped, including Jim Miller's youngest son, who had developed appendicitis. When the tracks were finally cleared, Dr. Garrett surprised everyone by announcing she'd like to stay. "This town needs a proper hospital," she said, "and I need a place that will let me practice medicine without constantly fighting to prove I'm capable." Emma and Caleb exchanged glances. The money from Philadelphia could make it happen. "We might be able to help with that," Emma said carefully. The hospital, small but modern, was built that spring on land donated by the town, with funding that Emma and Caleb provided anonymously through a group of concerned citizens. Dr. Garrett ran it with Doc Peterson's grateful assistance, and Miller's Creek suddenly had medical facilities that rivaled much larger towns. As Faith grew from infant to crawler, as James started school properly, as Grace revealed herself to have her mother's iron will and her father's way with animals, Emma often found herself marveling at the life they'd built. The ranch had grown to over 2,000 acres. The town had incorporated successfully, with Caleb serving his second term as mayor. The school had expanded to 3 teachers. The hospital served the entire valley, and their unconventional family compound had become a model that others copied. Clusters of homes where widows, single women, and abandoned families could live in mutual support and dignity. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Caleb said, "I've been thinking about stepping down as mayor." Emma looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because there are others who can do it now. Younger men with fresh ideas. And because I want to spend more time here, with you, with our children, with this life we've built." "Do you regret taking on so much responsibility?" "No. It needed doing, but now others can carry it forward." He took her hand. "I want to teach James to ride properly. I want to see Grace's first dance at the Harvest Social. I want to be here when Faith takes her first steps. I want to grow old with you on this porch, watching sunsets." Emma squeezed his hand. "That sounds perfect." A commotion in the yard interrupted them. The children, not just theirs but all of them, the whole extended brood, were chasing fireflies, their laughter bright in the gathering dusk. Margaret and Alice sat together on Alice's porch, talking quietly while keeping watchful eyes on the chaos. Smoke rose from chimneys of all three houses, and the smell of three different dinners cooking mingled in the evening air. "We did something extraordinary, didn't we?" Emma said softly. "From the worst beginning." "You did something extraordinary," Caleb corrected. "You took abandonment and turned it into abundance. You took isolation and turned it into community. You took three strangers and turned us into family." "I was the stranger," Emma reminded him. "You all took me in and changed everything for the better." As if summoned by their conversation, James ran up to them, face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Papa, we caught 12 fireflies. Grace says we should let them go so they can make more fireflies, but I think we should keep them in a jar." "What do you think we should do?" Emma asked him. James considered seriously. "Let them go," he decided. "So there will be fireflies for Faith when she's old enough to chase them." Emma and Caleb exchanged proud looks over his head. They were raising children who thought of others, who understood that sometimes you had to let go of what you caught to ensure future abundance. As darkness fell completely, the families gradually retreated to their respective homes. Emma carried Faith while Caleb herded James and Grace. At their door, Emma turned to look at the other houses, windows glowing warm in the night. "When I stood at Henderson's gate," she said, "abandoned and alone, I thought my life was over. And now I know it was just beginning." They went inside to their chaos, their noise, their love, their life. In the nursery, Faith slept peacefully. Down the hall, James and Grace whispered together, plotting some mischief for tomorrow. From outside came the sound of night birds and the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of the windmill that had been Caleb's first improvement to the ranch. Later, as they prepared for bed, Emma found herself studying her reflection in the mirror. She was no longer the desperate young woman who'd answered a matrimonial advertisement. Lines mapped her face now, laugh lines around her eyes, worry lines on her forehead, the marks of sun and wind and weather. Her hands were rough from work, her hair showing early silver. Harold Westbrook had been right about one thing. She had calloused hands and a body marked by hard work, but he'd been wrong about everything else. She had so much to show for her life. A thriving ranch, a growing town she'd helped shape, a hospital and school that served the entire valley. Most of all, she had family, both blood and chosen, bound together by love and loyalty rather than mere obligation. Caleb came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I'm weathered," she corrected. "You're seasoned, like good wood that's stronger for having weathered storms." She turned to face him, this man who'd offered a stranger shelter and ended up offering his heart. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Henderson hadn't abandoned me?" "Every day," Caleb admitted. "And every day I thank God he was fool enough to let you go." A cry from the nursery interrupted them. Faith, hungry as always. Emma went to tend her youngest daughter, settling into the rocking chair Caleb had made while she was pregnant with James. As she nursed the baby, she could hear Caleb checking on the older children, his low voice soothing Grace back to sleep after a nightmare. This was her life now, not the life she'd planned, not the life anyone would have predicted when she stood abandoned at that gate, but a life built choice by choice, day by day, into something stronger and more beautiful than any plan could have produced. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. The ranch needed constant tending. The children needed raising. The town would continue evolving. There would be conflicts to resolve, decisions to make, probably more strangers to fold into their ever-expanding definition of family. But tonight, in this house built by love and determination, surrounded by the family created from catastrophe, Emma knew she was exactly where she belonged. The abandoned bride had become the cornerstone of something lasting, something good, something that would continue long after she and Caleb were gone. Faith finished nursing and settled back to sleep, making the small sighing sounds that never failed to melt Emma's heart. She stood carefully, placed the baby back in her cradle, and paused to look at her sleeping daughter. Faith would grow up never knowing what it meant to be truly alone, to stand abandoned at a gate with nowhere to turn. She would grow up surrounded by love, by examples of strength and compassion, by the proof that families could be built from the most unlikely materials. Emma made her way back to her bedroom, where Caleb was already in bed, reading by lamplight. He set the book aside as she entered, making room for her beside him. "All quiet?" he asked. "All quiet," she confirmed, settling against him. They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the old house settling, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant howl of a coyote. These were the sounds of home, of belonging, of a life fully lived. "I love you," Caleb said quietly. "I don't say it enough." "You say it every day," Emma replied. "In the way you look at our children, the way you work this land, the way you've opened our home to others. Words are just one way of saying it. Still, you should hear the words. You deserve to hear them." "Then I love you too, Caleb Rowan, for stopping at that gate, for offering shelter, for becoming my partner, my friend, my love, for building this life with me." He kissed her forehead, a gentle benediction. "For as long as we have." "For as long as we have," she agreed. As sleep began to claim them, Emma thought one last time about that scared, desperate woman at Henderson's gate. If she could tell that woman one thing, it would be this: the worst moments don't define you. It's what you do with them, how you transform them, that matters. From abandonment can come belonging. From desperation can come determination. From the death of one dream can come the birth of something better, truer, more beautiful than anything you dared imagine. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Caleb's breathing, steady and sure beside her, and the quiet sounds of their home sheltering all those they loved. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.